discussed among DAC members and EnviroNet members, and there will be a small meeting discussing this in the OECD on November 22nd. So what are the key remaining issues in the negotiations? They are, what is the specific level of funding that will come out from Fast Start and in the long term? How do we determine the certainty of flows? And of course, how do we determine new, additional, adequate, and predictable? And again, as one of our colleagues will speak on this panel, the importance of private sector engagement. There's also a question being raised about whether an oversight body is needed and on MRV, the monitoring, reporting, and verifying. I do want to point out that the OECD does have a system to track ODA related to climate change. It's the creditor reporting system. For 10 years, we've been tracking commitments to mitigation. As of 2010, we're also tracking commitments to adaptation. And this only covers ODA, not private sector and other flows. And if you look since 2006, climate change financing has increased significantly, largely in energy, environment, transport and storage, water and forestry sectors. In 2008, mitigation alone was about 8.5 billion of a 109 billion total ODA. So then there's the last question, which is, again, what Thomas just highlighted, and that is that quantity matters over quality. And right now, there's only predicted to be about 17 billion projects, both mitigation and adaptation, that are ready. So the question is, how do we have effective climate change financing? And it requires good projects and good capacity on the ground, but it also requires good behavior by donors. And the donors have committed to the Paris Declaration and the Accra Agenda for Action in terms of country ownership, in terms of providing financing through country systems. But there's still a need, and I have to confess, I borrowed this slide from Sarah Feisen, who presented at the workshop Tom was referring to yesterday. But there is a need to translate this rhetoric of the Paris Declaration and Accra Agenda for Action into action. So just in terms of where we are...
I'm sorry, I really hate to be in this role, but if you can just maybe conclude, because we have still other panelists.
Last slide. So we've made progress on reliable public financial management systems, technical assistance, and untied aid, but special effort is needed in country systems and in making aid more predictable. And these same lessons can be applied for climate change financing.
All right, thank you so much. Lots of information, lots of figures in those slides. Maybe we can share it somehow in the follow-up so you can further look at it. But thanks a lot for sharing those. I would like to call on Brett, a colleague at USAID, if you can use your 5 minutes to share your thoughts on your burning issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'm speaking on ODA and adaptation financing, which dovetails very nicely with the presentation just made. And the issue, there is the issue of new and additional, and I guess that'll be settled at a very higher level. But the issue of adaptation financing, even if you agree it's new and additional, how do you identify what is exactly adaptation financing? You have adaptations, you have resilience, you have regular development, you have disaster risk reduction, and trying to figure out what is the additional financing that is related to adaptation is quite difficult. Let's say you have a flood protection program, and you want to, and you run it through a climate filter, and you say, well, maybe we have to raise the embankment a little bit, or because of the floods are going to be a little bit larger, and we have to increase the early warning systems and the shelters, but trying to desegregate the exact amount of money that is adaptation and what is regular development is quite difficult. And if you're going to make adaptation funding new and additional, being able to disaggregate it will be important, because then you can allocate that funding to the adaptation and get that as grant, whereas the development may come through other ODA flows, which may be loans from World Bank or ADB. Now, having said that, it's hard to differentiate. There are certain investments that are quite clearly due to climate change. For example, in Pacific Islands, where the sea level rise will start affecting their aquifers, and they have the Guyven-Hertzberg freshwater lens. And as the sea level rises, those lenses become, the salt water starts encroaching, and they have to start looking for new water resources for their water supplies. And so investments, for example, in desalination in Pacific Islands may be an adaptation investment and should be sourced then through an adaptation grant as opposed to a development assistance. So there are areas where it'll be very hard to disaggregate the adaptation amount, but others where maybe it's more clear. And then resilience financing. Again, if you have a flood warning system with shelters, is that adaptation or is it resilience part of a regular development assistance program? And so those decisions on how we're going to disaggregate will be very, very difficult to make in the future, but very important if you want to tap into adaptation grant financing for projects in the developing countries. Going down one step further, when you start channeling these flows through the different aid agencies, their capacity to channel the flows. Are the people who are handling the development assistance going to be the same ones who deal with the adaptation, or are we going to scale up the aid agencies? And the spaghetti bowl that was pointed out, on the recipient side, the government agencies that receive these funds, are there going to be bottlenecks when all of a sudden we're almost doubling the level of assistance because of the climate change adaptation funding, which is in a World Bank report recently, they were looking at about 80% of what the current ODA levels are. So there's going to be bottlenecks and there's going to be problems in channeling that new and additional money to the developing countries. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for saving us actually 2 minutes of time. That's really appreciated by a moderator. But nevertheless, the thoughts were very, very concise, and I think very in depth. And as you said, was very nicely ending on the previous presentation. I would like to call on the other side of the table, Olivier, Agent France de Développement. See at the plate.
Thank you. I am the representative of one of these spaghettis you have seen in the bowl. And, but just imagine that there is only one spaghetti in the bowl. I think it won't be very, very attractive for us. And so I'm quite sure that there is a need for several spaghettis in the bowl. Maybe there is too much right now, but the diversity is also a need to avoid the risk of pensée unique, the unique thinking that could lead to bad solution to this very complex problem we are facing. AFD, the French Development Agency, in fact, is a development bank with mostly providing loans with our collaborative governments. And our mandate in Asia, where we are now for more than 10 years, starting our activities in Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam, and expanding them to emerging countries for a few years now. Our mandate is focusing on green growth and what we call public worldwide goods, and climate is one of these worldwide goods we are trying to solve, to sustain. As a bilateral agency, we are maybe more flexible than other bigger structures, in particular to finance piloting activities. And I would like just to take one example with the transfer from Brazil of no-tillage and direct seedlings in mulch cover cropping system. We financed this kind of piloting project in Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia for some years now, with very interesting results. And when we are looking at that, we can raise the question, is it climate change projects? These improvements in the cropping system in agriculture allow a more intensive agriculture with better productivity of the system, with a better resilience from this agriculture to climate hazard, and at the same time with a better storage of carbon in the soil. Is it adaptation? Is it mitigation? Is it normal development project towards agriculture enhancement? The question is still open. Another example could be given through irrigation development. We are financing or co-financing with ADB such projects, for instance, in Vietnam and also in Cambodia for some years from now. The challenge of irrigation development is not only new infrastructure, additional infrastructure, or climate change adaptation for this infrastructure. The challenge in irrigation is the governance of this infrastructure, with the shared responsibility between governments and users of this agriculture. Investing in irrigation, is it climate change relative finance? Is it traditional ODA? I don't know. I cannot share the part of climate change activities and the share of traditional ODA. I cannot end my speech without mentioning the co-financing we are providing with JICA, for instance, in Indonesia and soon in Vietnam, regarding the climate change program loan. This vehicle is through budget support to this government, support to help them to target a little bit more explicitly or efficiently the climate change issues. I think it's also part of the response that such agency as ours could provide to this question. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you so much. And thank you for providing these very practical, grand examples. And it's clear that the question of additionality is coming in from all circles. I would like to ask Lena to take the floor from the Asia Center at the Asian Institute of Technology.
Thank you. I guess that's important in this big room. It's generally accepted, and it's also been mentioned in Tamara's presentation, for example, that a large part of the finance needs for adaptation will have to come from private sector sources. At the same time, it's become clear over the past decades that economic development and resulting access to jobs, income, goods, services has enabled a rapid rise out of poverty for millions of people around the globe, especially through opportunities created by small enterprise development. At the same time, it is of course the impact of past rapid growth and industrializations, sometimes of course fueled by socially and environmentally unsustainable business practices, as well as the framework conditions that enabled or indeed incentivized those, that has created the challenges that we are now facing from climate change. But I think the point here is, and what we're discussing here is, climate change is happening and we need to adapt. And irrespective of how the problems were created, and I would be very hesitant to single out one single culprit here, we need solutions. And solutions that maybe some of the traditional mechanisms for aid may not have been able to deliver over the past 50 or 60 years.